Good afternoon, and thank you for attending Black Hat this year. I'd like to welcome you to a talk with the title of Turning Camera Surveillance on its Axes. Without further ado, please welcome to the stage Noam Moshe.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to my talk, Turning Camera Surveillance on its Axis. So before I start, a short word about myself. My name is Noam. I am the team lead and lead vulnerability researcher for Clarity Team 82. Now, basically, my day job, and I believe it's a very cool day job, is to look for vulnerabilities on all sorts of different devices and to responsibly disclose them to the vendor. And here in the background, you can see one of, I think, 6 racks that we have back in our lab in the TLV, where we have all sorts of different equipment that we get to plug in and find vulnerabilities and basically explore. This is essentially my playground. And when I'm saying all sorts of vulnerabilities, I do mean all sorts of devices. For example, we have OT like HMIs, PLCs, medical devices like patient monitors, DNA sequencers, and my personal favorite and today's topic, IoT devices. So without further ado, let's jump right in. And today, my story starts with a goal I set to myself. I want to demonstrate how attackers can hack big companies out there in the wild. And usually, when attackers have this goal, they do one simple approach, and they search for open services. You see, they go to Census and Shodan and look for IP addresses associated with a certain organization. In it, they'll find all their open services that are exposed to the internet, all their VPNs, remote access, file sharing, everything, and this will be the target to get the initial access to the network. And when I did that to a certain organization, I discovered a service I do not know of, which is access remoting. Now, when I see a service that is esoteric and unknown, usually that's my goal to search vulnerabilities in, and this was what led me to my research. Now, what is Axis before we start understanding what is access remoting? You see, Axis is a very big vendor in the world of IP cameras and video surveillance. They make a wide range of different cameras that are aimed mainly at organizations. Think of big companies, warehouses, medical institution, educational institution, anything of that sort. Now, all their cameras are Linux-based, running a custom OS called Axis OS, and they fully modular, fully controllable, supporting various different services. However, the main problem arises when a company, and let's face it, all companies, have more than one cameras. They need to cover a wide range physical area, different offices, different levels, different warehouses, you name it, and in that way, they have more than one camera. And this makes controlling and managing this camera quite a hassle. And to help solve this, Axis offers a wide range of services. The first one is Axis Device Manager. Basically, think of it as one centralized location to control, manage, and configure all of your camera fleet. In addition to that, at the end of the day, the main usage of camera is, of course, video surveillance, and that's where Axis Camera Station comes into play. Through this one centralized location, you are able to view a matrix of all your different camera feeds, control, access, consume all the live feed. And essentially, this is how it looks like. Think of like a guard station or stuff like that, where you have all the different camera feeds being streamed live into your computer. Now, because like I've said, many organizations have a wide range of cameras that are on across different physical locations, we need to be able to somehow access our camera feed remotely. Think, for example, my company has few different field offices, and they want one centralized location, one centralized server to be able to access all the different camera feeds. And because of that, remote access is a must. Now, to support remote access, Axis implemented a secure protocol that is called Access Remoting. It is fully encrypted, fully authenticated, meaning it is safe to expose to the internet, and this is actually stated in the Axis documentation. Now, of course, exposing ports on the internet is not for everybody. And to do that, Axis offers a cloud solution that calls Axis Remote Access. It is not Axis Remoting. And that way, you are able to access your camera feed without actually exposing your devices. But it's pay-per-traffic. It costs quite a lot. And many organizations opt out to on-prem solution by exposing their services. And because Axis Remoting is fully encrypted, fully authenticated, it is more safe to be able to do that and expose your service to the internet. So this is essentially the network layout where you have your client that connects via Axis Remoting to the server. And this is my goal, very simple. All I need to do is find pre-auth remote code execution and be able to control the Axis managed servers. And of course, because the Axis managed server controls the camera fully, it actually manages them. By exploiting that server, I am able to pivot and control every different camera that is in that organization's fleet. Simple enough, and because a lot of different organizations use it, by having one vulnerability that is fully pre-auth, not require anything prior, I am able to fully exploit every company out there in the world that uses Axis Remote Access, that uses Axis Remoting, that expose these servers to the one. And of course, there are many of it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. Simple enough. Let's see how it was done and how I was able to uncover it. So first, I started by doing a lot of reverse engineering on the Axis servers. You see, this is a Windows.NET application, native application, meaning no browser. It is a desktop application, and it has a unique proprietary client and server to be able to communicate with one another. Now, the Axis Remoting protocol is fully wrapped with MTLS, meaning you are not able to actually unwrap and see it clear text. And fully authenticated, everything requires authentication. The first thing you need to do is to authenticate to the server, and only then you are able to start communicating. And because the protocol is fully wrapped with MTLS, my first goal was to simply unwrap it, meaning I want to be able to do static protocol analysis, see the packets, see what's going on under the hood. And this is exactly what I did. I set up a simple man-in-the-middle MTLS server that intercepts the client's connection, forwards it to the server, and that way I'm able to fully unwrap, see clear text communication between the client and the server, and then start investigating what is going on under the hood and what's going on in the protocol. And this is exactly the Axis Remoting protocol. This is the handshake and start of initialization of the protocol. And we see that it's composed of different steps. First of all, the first step is the client sending the user agent to the server, telling them, hey, I am an Axis Remoting client. Let's start talking Axis Remoting. This is a way that the server is able to verify that only the clients communicate with it and not an automatic scanner, for example, communicates with it. Immediately after the user agent is sent, the server and clients do an NTLM SSP authentication, meaning NTLM challenge response. This way, the server is able to validate that only authenticated, valid users connect to it. And a super interesting tidbit is that as per NTLM authentication, the server's hostname, meaning the hostname and domain, is supplied and sent by the server, meaning we are able to leak it without actually having any valid credentials. And after that, after we authenticated using NTLM SSP, we are able to finally talk Axis Remoting, which is a JSON-based protocol where the client invokes functionalities on the server, basically supporting an RPC procedure, remote procedure call, enabling clients to execute methods on the server's backend. And when I saw this, my goal was to try and understand how this RPC mechanism is implemented. How does Axis servers expose functionality for clients to use? And to do that, Axis chose to use a very common way of doing RPC in .NET Remoting, which is the service contract decorator. You see, this way, a server is able to expose different classes and different functions for remote clients to invoke on it. And this way, it is possible for the client to expose and actually invoke functionalities on the servers. All the server needs to do is to expose the functions via the service contract. However, while it's very simple, the problem arises when a more complicated thing happens. What happens, for example, if a function does not receive a primitive member as its parameter? Not a string, not an int, not a long, but instead a class. You see on the logon async function, the function receives a client information DTO, a more class that is actually composed of different primitive members. And to do that, the server needs to somehow understand the client sent it a complicated class and not a primitive member. And this is done via deserialization, because what is not done via deserialization? And as it turns out, Axis used the JSON deserialization functionality, and they support the type name handling auto, meaning the client fully controls what is the class that is created on the server's backend. Now, this is super dangerous because this is a very classic deserialization vulnerability where the client can create arbitrary classes in the server's memory space, and in .NET, this immediately leads to remote code execution. For example, we can see a request right here, and we see that the client specifies the $sign type and specifying the Windows Client API class, meaning this is what will be created on the server's backend. Now, this is super cool because we have a very simple, very cool deserialization vulnerability, and in .NET, this immediately leads to remote code execution. So let's see how we can exploit it. First, we need to create an MTLS connection, connect to an Axis server. We need to specify the Axis remoting user agent, bypass the NTLM SSP challenge response, and then, wabam, we are able to send deserialization payload and invoke our vulnerability. There's only one problem, one tiny problem. I hope you didn't catch it. This is auth. We need to be authenticated. This is not a pre-auth vulnerability, which quite honestly sucks because it is not exploitable in real life, no prerequisite exploitation technique. So we have a deserialization vulnerability, we have an RCE, but it requires auth. However, it is still usable. We can still use it to exploit the server, so let's see how. All we need to do is go back to our man-in-the-middle setup. We man-in-the-middle a client and a server, and basically manage and impersonate an Axis server. Then we do a pass the hash vulnerability, a very simple NTLM SSP pass the hash, where we allow the client to authenticate to the server, bypassing the request and response, the challenge and response. And after the client fully authenticates, because Axis implements no signing, we are able to inject our deserialization payload, which we can very easily generate using YSO serial. And by generating a malicious payload in .NET, once again, full RCE, we are able to invoke a reverse shell on the Axis server via this man-in-the-middle. And of course, since the client also talks in Axis remoting, we are able to do the same to it as well. Meaning by man-in-the-middle a connection, we are able to execute code on both the client and the server, basically attacking and gaining reverse shell out of everything. But that's not all. Because once we control the Axis remoting server, we now also control the cameras. So let's see how we are able to pivot our way into the cameras and fully control and execute code on them as well, because this is our goal. So luckily for us, like I've said, Axis is a very awesome ecosystem. And they offer very vast modularity on their cameras, meaning admins can install packages, basically modifying how the camera behaves, adding features, doing whatever they want with it. And anyone can create camera, a package. You can either download from Axis, you can download from the store, or you can create your own using Axis SDK. And luckily, the Axis SDK is amazing. They have a GitHub page, they have tons of examples. Even me, I can create an Axis package without having good knowledge with coding. So it's super simple. So all you need to do is create your own package, go to the camera which you control through the Axis device manager, add your package, and wabam, you have a reverse shell on the camera as well. Meaning at this point, you are able to execute code on the client, the server, and all the cameras owned by that server, which is super, super cool. Now, that's GG, right? That's it. We control the servers, right? Well, no. Like I've said, my goal is quite simple. I want full pre-auth RCE on the cameras. I don't want man-in-the-middle. I don't want one-click vulnerabilities. I don't want any prerequisite. Our goal is to actually demonstrate real-life hacking of Axis servers. And to do that, we need to bypass auth and not only rely on man-in-the-middle. Now, at that point, I've been through a lot in the access remoting protocol, and quite honestly, I reached a dead end. I couldn't manage to bypass the auth. They have good checks, everything is checked. The NTLM SSP basically blocks anything whatsoever. And usually when I reach a dead end, I pivot my way, and in this specific case, I went to the access documentation. And one thing I noticed is that if the main port used for the access remoting protocol is not accessible for some reason whatsoever, there is a fallback protocol. And when reading the documentation, I see some very weird language saying this port is HTTP with AES encryption, something very uncommon. And I was like, okay, let's see this protocol and see how it behaves, but it is very weird. And because I saw it is HTTP, I simply went to my browser, entered my IP address and this port, and sadly I was encountering an authentication form, meaning it is still fully authenticated. I need to somehow bypass the auth. And not only that, when I actually put in my credentials, it simply did not work. I saw this white page loading indefinitely, nothing is going on behind the scenes. At this point I was like, what the hell? Why does my browser not support this allegedly HTTP protocol? And this led me down the rabbit hole of understanding that it is not an HTTP protocol. And instead, we are talking about a custom protocol. So after a lot of reverse engineering, I managed to unwire and unwrap this protocol. So let me give you a very quick glimpse about this abomination of a protocol. First, whenever an Axis client tries to authenticate to connect via the HTTP protocol, they do a get/connection. And the server returns in turn a channel ID. Now, a very important note is that this connection is kept for the throughout of the channel communication, meaning we do not close this connection, this socket connection. After that, a new connection is made by the client where they specify the channel ID they've received from the server, and wabam, we have our two endpoints. We essentially have two streams, an RX and TX, receive and transmit. Via these two streams, these two sockets, we are able to send and receive messages to and from the server. After that begins the key exchange. First, each endpoint sends the other their public key, then they take the public key, randomize the new AES key, and encrypt it with the other side's public key. And from that moment on, they've exchanged keys, they've exchanged AES keys, and they are able to communicate with one another in an encrypted format, meaning we now have an access remoting connection. Now, at this point, after I managed to implement and understand, I was like, what the hell? Why implement such protocol? I mean, essentially, this is raw sockets, raw binary sockets, and it is actually sockets, binary sockets behind the scenes that are implemented over HTTP. And I mean, they use both symmetric, asymmetric algorithm. It is fully encrypted, even though it is plain HTTP. So I guess it's secure, right? Well, turns out no. They still use access remoting behind the scenes, meaning the minute I pass and I have this RX and TX channel, under the hood, still serialized JSON messages are being sent from one endpoint to the other, meaning it is susceptible to the same RCE vulnerability we discovered before. Next, my goal was simple. I said, OK, I couldn't bypass the authentication on the main protocol. What about the backup protocol? And to do that, I wanted to see how the authentication was configured on this web server. And sadly for me, the authentication was configured on all routes using the authentication schemas negotiate, meaning either Kerberos or NTLM, meaning once again, challenge and response, is required for every connection. And this was what popped up the authentication form, telling me, hey, please enter a username and a password. This meant that no matter what, we had to supply valid credentials whenever we contacted this web server. Or did we? After more time reverse engineering the application, I discovered this super duper secret endpoint, which is basically /_/, which for some reason, I don't know why, supports the authentication schemas anonymous, meaning no authentication whatsoever. This meant that by accessing this API route, /_/, I am able to start talking access remoting without having to supply valid credentials. So let's try and understand the exploitation plan. First, we use this hidden schema, /_/, to bypass the authentication need. This is essentially a very simplistic authentication bypass that allows us to start talking access remoting protocol. Then we need to implement this wheel protocol. We need to exchange keys, send public key, you name it. However, the minute we have these RX and TX channels up and running, we are able to fully send access remoting packets. We are able to serialize the serialization payload and execute code on the server's backend, meaning we have full pre-auth RCE. Now, at this point, this is what we have. We are able to target and attack any access server, either camera station or device manager, out there in the wild, fully pre-auth, no prior knowledge whatsoever, and attack it, execute code on it, and using our package, pivot our way into the different cameras it manages. GG, we have pre-auth RCE. However, once I did that, I wanted to actually understand what is the effect. I mean, what did I have on my hands? And to do that, I wanted to see who is susceptible, who is vulnerable to such an attack. Once again, I went to my trusted buddy, Sensis or Shodan, and I queried for different servers that expose the access remoting protocol, and I discovered around 6,500. And the most interesting part is that almost 4,000 are in the US. Okay, cool, so I have 65,000 servers. I guess that's a lot. But who is actually sitting behind these servers? I mean, I don't want to attack just plain IP addresses. I want to attack real organizations. So next, my goal was to try and understand who is sitting behind it. Luckily for me, because I know the access remoting protocol, I know that it uses NTLM SSP, meaning the server actually advertises the hostname and domain on every connection. Once I send the magic string, which is access remoting user agent. So by simply connecting to a server, we're able to query it and leak the information about who is connected to it. Here, once again, if you can't remember, this is how an access remoting packet looks like, and we can see my hostname /clarity inside the NTLM SSP challenge and response. So we can connect to every server on the internet, query it for information, and know exactly who is sitting behind it. In this list, we'll find a lot of different educational institutions, medical institutions, government, big companies, you name it. Basically, whoever is an access client and exposes their servers online. And when I discovered so many servers that are exposed by such big companies, I asked myself, why? Why do we see so many servers? And the answer is actually quite complicated. First of all, this field of IP camera surveillance is less and less open. Many Chinese-based companies are being banned in US and Europe, giving actual users less options to pick from when it comes to their video surveillance. Second, obviously, this is a very common, very used service. You want to be able to access your devices remotely, manage them, and of course, consume the video feed. And because the protocol is fully encrypted, fully authenticated, people often think that whatever is encrypted is secure. However, this is obviously not the case. Now, before I'm going to open up for questions, I want to give credit where credit is due. We've worked and composed the entire research and disclosed it directly to Axis, which worked valiantly to make sure that their devices are secured in as little time as possible. I can tell you I've done a lot of vulnerability disclosure processes, but Axis was probably one of the swiftest. So kudos to them. They talked to their clientele and made sure everything is patched. Now is our turn. We need to make sure we are patching, we are staying up to date, and of course, we are not exposing servers that should not be exposed to the internet. So thank you very much. If you have any questions, I believe there are mics in the middle of the room. So feel free to ask you. Thank you very much. And if not, I'll be here for more questions at the end. So, oh yeah, thank you.
Did the cameras need to be patched, or is that all on the server software?
That's a great question. Do the camera needs to be patched? No, this is a legitimate functionality of the Axis servers. You are able to control the cameras. That's the main usage. So no, just the server. The patches are available for a few months. Everyone who uses the Axis software got a pop-up making sure, hey, there's a major security update, so please update. So just the servers. Oh yeah, thank you very much.